Welcome everyone to our Index seminars, webinars. Today we have Shankara Bharadwaj ji. He is from Bangalore and a very curious and a diligent student of Hindu worldview. He will be presenting the Hindu social order, the past and the present and the future. What that means, I do not know myself, but you're quite interested in listening to what he's going to say. And I think this also will drive the future of, at least in conceptually, the future of Hindu society and how the state runs. Welcome, Shankarji. I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you, Prasadji, for having me here. The title probably sounds a bit grand, but we'll try to do justice as much as we can. To set a context why we wanted to do this talk, the purpose why I thought this was necessary. Primarily, information. This is the age of information, so there is no shortage of information. The statistics we have, the past, what happened, we have what is happening today, we know in terms of the details. But what is really missing is perspective over these facts. And why perspective is important is any transformation in the system to the state, the way state runs, or in the society is primarily driven by the perspective. It's not driven by fact. A perspective created based on a selection of facts is always the basis for any major transformation, policy making, laws, or things like that. And as of now, the perspective we have, which is governing our state and the society, is primarily the one set by the outsider. So which is essentially why we'll need to develop an insider perspective, apply an in-prism view to the reality, have our own experience of our reality rather than applying an outsider prism. And this perspective change, how it matters, we'll try to see. But it is essential that we apply the in-prism to understand our society, our way, and to ensure that the right transformation in our view is influenced based on that perspective. So to be able to gain a perspective, we can't actually take a judgmental position about anything. We'll need to understand past and present as they are, as much as possible through our prism. So it won't be a defense or a apology or a substantiation or support of anything. Primarily, we want to understand things. That's the purpose I have in mind in doing this. Obviously, there are human errors, so please bear with me if I can't do justice to it. This is the broad content I have in mind. Primarily, I want to start with a few introspective questions. The questions that probably have not been sufficiently asked or answers sufficiently sought for. And then understand how Varna operated in state and society levels in the past, and is it operating in present. A bit of teleology of jati, the functional aspect of it. Then understanding a few basic dynamics of human society, and then understanding our institutions, the Hindu institutions. And then what does it mean for future if we want to design our own systems. So to start with, a few questions I had in mind a few years ago when I started studying. What is exactly the role of state in the fate of society? And is it sufficiently factored in any analysis per se? Because most of what we see or I have studied as an analysis presented about the social order is primarily limited to society. But society is essentially governed by the state. So the state policy and how state has seen the society is essential. That is actually a determining factor, in fact. And it becomes more important when we take into consideration the fact that we had different kingdoms over centuries. If we see very diverse kingdoms, very diverse, in fact, we had outsiders for a long time. We had the Mughals, the Turco-Mongols, Arabs. Then we had the British, French, Portuguese, Dutch, different levels of influence, external influence, directly acting through the state that had governed various regions of the Indian subcontinent. So has anybody really done an honest analysis of the influence state had in the experiences of the society, its rise and fall, its prosperity and its impoverishment, and as a result the internal conflicts and all that. The second question I wanted to ask was, is there any Varna Mimamsa in text? Now obviously there is description of 4 Varnas and all that. This doesn't need to be told, but has there been any analysis of, if we take the Itihasa, Purana, or even the recent texts, much analysis of taking a person, trying to analyze what his Varna is or change of the Varna? There is not much data that comes. Obviously, there are many social groups, so there is a description of those people, but there is no elaborate analysis of anybody's Varna. So what it tells us, is it really a functional aspect? Is Varna a functional aspect, or is a functional aspect being conflated with what we think is Varna? Because obviously today there is no Varna not operating at all. It did not operate under British either, because that's not how the statecraft ran. So we only have back projections on how things would have worked. We don't actually have a very good understanding of how things really work if the principle is operating. Similarly, is there, what kind of upper, lower, or forward, backward classifications do we have? And why do they have? Is it, what kind of permanence does each concept have in the different texts? And what is the correlation between the social, economic, political, and the spiritual classifications? Now we have various kinds of collectivities. It's not just that caste is central. We have desha, we have sampradaya, we have kula, we have jati, we have varna. Now there are several kinds of groupings that our society has. Have all these been conflated into a single social unit, which is actually what we see in the past century or so, because we just don't have a very good perspective of what is the sphere of operation of each of these different collectivities, and how is lived reality correlated to text. And this is important because today there is no living pedagogy of a lot of these texts, especially the ones with the social dynamics. We do have living traditions that discuss, let us say, the different shastras, the darshanas are there. Some darshanas are dead, but some we still have traditions, living traditions. Veda, we have living traditions. Vedanta, we have living traditions. But we don't have living traditions that actually do a proper study of these subjects like the social order and things like that. So that with the dead pedagogy, how much can we say that we are doing the right understanding of the text and correlating it to our lived reality? And which prism are we applying when we look at the present day reality? Are we applying an in prism or an out prism? The next question is, how do we separate a normative statement from an ontological statement? I mean, there is a nature of things when Shastra is primarily not about it's not always about a vidhi nisheda or do's and don'ts. There is a do's and don'ts section in some Shastras, the Dharma Sutras, for instance. But that's not how majority of the literature is. Majority of our any scientific subject or technical subject is trying to explain the nature of the world through the window of that subject's epistemology. Physics has its way. Aesthetics has its way. Similarly, Veda has its way. Each darshana has its own prism. So it is explaining how much do we actually conflate the nature of the world as explained by the Dharma Shastra with normative statements like you ought to do this, you don't, ought not do this. This is extremely important because Dharma Shastra is mostly seen as a normative text, which in reality it's not. And this normative view has creeped in primarily as a result of the applying of the out prism. I mean, we can do a separate one if it makes sense on a Dharma Shastra, but about half the text is ontological in nature. In fact, more than half of it. Only a bit of it is primarily Vidhi Nisheda, saying, recommending the state what it should do, what it should not do, recommending the various individuals in positions what they should do, what they should not do. And then there are life codes for individuals, which are they are recommendations, but again, they don't apply at a wider social level. So these classifications, different types of the statements we'll need to understand. The more current dilemma that we'll be faced with is who is exactly deciding the parameters of fairness, opportunity, prosperity. On what basis is somebody deciding who is forward, who is backward, who is treatment, who is treated in a fair way and who is not treated in a fair way? Based on, is it based on potential, is it based on opportunity, on what basis? Now getting into a little bit of data related questions. Did society actually become rigid at some point? I mean, because this is something we keep hearing. At some point, this Varna was not based on birth. Over time, it had become based on birth. Society got ossified and all that. Is it really the case? Because what we see, things have been changing in the past century. There has been a lot of change in the society. And before that, there has been a lot of change. Every single century in the past, there has been a continuous transformation in the society. How exactly did rigidity, what people think of as rigidity, come in? Because intermixture has been there. Now, change of vocation has been there. Most of what people complain has not been there. If we look at the data, that doesn't turn out to be really reality over a long term. Yeah, within a decade, within a few years, if we have a very narrow view of time, that applies. But for the kind of time frames that this civilization has experienced and the transformations we are seeing over centuries, that doesn't really hold water. Now, one can argue also that, let us say, transformations happen over a long stretch of time, but what about an individual's fate? Because his life is short-lived. Has there been any opportunity for transformation? That also we see that is the case. And you can get into some examples, but primarily what happens is, it's not that the society doesn't have problems. There is suffering, everything is there, but problem is in the prism that we apply and how we understand the problems versus how we understand the institutions, how we confront the institutions or the lawmaking with how things are actually happening in the society. So that brings us to the main question: did India really prosper due to the Western prism, application of Western prism? Is it because of equality or individualism, or did we actually prosper because of social capital? We can again look at it century by century. Data, tells something very different from what we tend to perceive. And a very obvious question: is it the British defined Indian caste ladder that is birth based, or is it the Hindu order? The corollary is basically, if you see 1820 to 1931 two census, the differences, the amount of education that we had, the amount of wealth we had, the amount of the nature of vocations different groups undertook in the society in 1920 versus in 1931, the level of education. We will be faced with a very obvious question: who actually weaponized literacy in India and who made literacy such a major problem in India. The need for literacy is such a major problem. The other now curious question, which probably we will be faced with in future also, and we will really need to find an answer. What kind of paradox is it where equality, oppressions, and genocides coexist in the same world? No, either you can have equality, a society where there is equality and harmony, or you can have mass murders and genocides. If there is tolerance, it's quite paradoxical that we think there are some societies which are really, egalitarian and all that, they're tolerant and all that, but the same societies actually perpetrate most of the violent crimes in the world against other societies. Now, those other societies, sometimes they are across the geography, sometimes they are in the same geography. This kept varying. This keeps varying even today. But this is a paradox. We don't often understand why it actually happens that way, which is why the question, are rules really universal? Or are we really missing something very fundamental when we frame these theories about the present and the future? As a corollary, we can take this example. How many matrilinear groups actually could survive in in the West, specifically US, which is supposed to be the most tolerant and an open society? We know what happened to those within the subcontinent. So, which brings us to another question: do we actually conflate uniformity with equality? So I know some of these questions we have answered, some we don't, but these are more intended to drive home the point that a lot of assumptions we make are really assumptions, and unless we ask these questions, we don't realize that these are assumptions. So now coming to our social order, where primarily Varna is the term that we find in the texts, whereas in society we don't as much find the term. We see a lot of groups, different collectivities. So exactly what is the relevance? Did it ever play any part in society? Is it playing a part? So post-colonial, we have our experience, primarily the nearly colonial state-based policies. We'll get there, but what immediately precedes it is the British state, which basically neither governed India according to Rajadharma, nor did it apply any Varna Dharma. What it did is, in terms of penal codes and personal codes, it left the laws, personal laws, to be made by different groups for themselves. But the British state never either used Varna or Rajadharma to govern Indian society. So basically, what exactly we see under British as a transformation in the Indian society, if we say it is because of Varna, we are basically, we are wrong there. What operated in society at the group level, at the individual level, and what operated at the macro level as a governing policy, as a social policy, as an economic policy, these are two very different things. To give a simple example, obviously there are 4 Varnas, but all the Trivarnika functions have been nearly eliminated by the British. Basically, the learning system has been replaced. So the Brahma is, marginalized, which is why most Brahmins actually went into the literary functions, clerical jobs, all those things. India was heavily demilitarized right from criminalizing of the martial groups. So the Kshatriya is gone. The trade was explicitly snatched from India. There were laws made to, so that we can export only the raw materials, we can import only the finished goods, we can't export the finished goods. So basically trade was completely shifted from India to Britain. I mean, these are all facts that everybody knows. We don't have to do research to, these are known facts. What we miss is, where do these facts fit in? Primarily, very clearly, if we apply an insider prism, it clearly shows out that all the three Varnas have been eliminated. Entire society is forced into the fourth Varna. So obviously there is conflict of interest, shortage of resources, shortage of space. Internal conflict is an obvious result of all these things. This is not how we are made to see the situation. As a result, obviously the society getting impoverished again, this is a well-known reality. Several groups lost their livelihood, lost their self-esteem. All these things have happened. But the fact is there is no Varna in operation anytime through this. And going a little further back under Maratha, because Marathas actually wrested back most of the subcontinent from the Muslims. There what we observe is the decline of Varna. In fact, the Peshwas and Sahukars, we see a lot of Brahmins taking up the non-Brahmin vocations under the Marathas. We see early feudal trends where land getting notified as a commodity, all that. We see a lot of political expansion and political independence, sort of, but society was basically worn out by war. So we see high taxation and all that. It's not a very healthy situation, but definitely a situation where we are craving an independence and trying to establish ourselves. Deep sea control was lost, so we had a constrained trade, but trade was still not surviving. It was not dead. So under Marathas, what we see, knowledge function was, in a preservation mode. It was not in a flourishing mode, obviously. Trade was constrained, but trade was living. So what we see under Marathas is a decline of the Varnashramas. We don't see them in their glory. We really see visible Chaturvarnya and its operating demonstration under the Vijayanagaras, which immediately preceded the Marathas, where we see a prosperous society, we see knowledge generation, we see Veda Bhashyas written, a lot of aesthetic functions happening, we see great military power, we see great trade and overall prosperity, abhyudaya of the society. So what does this tell us? I mean, the obvious conclusion we have to draw from this is Chaturvarna correlated always positively with the society's rise and prosperity. It did not correlate with the society's downfall. Wherever it operated, it resulted in a greater prosperity. If we go further back from the Vijayanagara, in fact, if we see post Mahabharata, most of the past, the biggest empire had been Magadha, which had only seen an upward mobility. A lot of royal lineages rose from the Shudras and other groups. Upward mobility is a natural fact of any prospering society. It's not as if it needs to be artificially engineered. When society prospers, all groups prosper. And now, is that the case post-independence? Although economically we are just coming out of the woods, more groups have actually spiraled downwards. Not many groups spiraled upwards in terms of the dharma. Materially, in some sense they did, but in many senses, even materially, a lot of groups have not gone upward spiraling. There is a craving to advertise a group, each group as backward, craving privileges, patronage, all those things. So again, the lesson stands. Chaturvarna actually correlates with society's rise and prosperity. Into teleology of the jati, what exactly is the functional use of it? The fact is that we do have jatis, but why do you actually need them? The primary reason anybody sees is diversity is preserved through different collective identities, and elimination of diversity to seek consistency has always resulted in civil wars and extermination of different groups. Various groups have been exterminated, genocided, primarily because of an absence of a very well organized, diverse social identifications. Basically, what number one, obviously, it gives a social capital, a collective capital. Groups have better bargaining power with the state and with the rest of the society than individuals. But along with that, what it gives is it ensures social space for each group, which an individual cannot enjoy by himself. So this is the reason now, because there is a functional utility, it is being used by people. It's not as if people are bad, and then obviously that's not the case. People naturally discard what is not useful and keep what is useful. So there is a teleology, there is a obvious utility. So our characterization of the problem cannot be that society is a problem or individuals are problem, because the whole system is arranged for the sake of individuals and the society. So we can't mistake the patient for the disease. We'll need to address the problems society is facing rather than treat society as a problem. And obviously, if we look at the external conflicts we have, society is there, the victim, obviously not the aggressor. So we will end up making the victim the aggressor if we don't apply the right prism. Now, as you know, I mentioned, if we look at a long term, each group, each individual has rise and fall based on the survival fitness on the evolutionary stage each group is, how well the vocations and the practices of each group have been assigned or shaped up by the group leadership. So it's not as if any single group has not been at the top of society, and no single group has been at the bottom of society for more than a few centuries. So these rises and fall happens. We'll need to understand why this happens. When society prospers overall, upward mobility will be there, most groups prosper. And when a society is oppressed externally or by use of state force, most groups suffer. And different groups suffer to different extent based on their current survival fitness. It's not because one group tries to oppress other. There is a natural contention for resource and one will try to win over the other. This will result in a oppression of some groups more than some other groups. Obviously, everybody will suffer to different degrees. Therefore, the most important thing for us is to ensure the system is creating the positive incentive to set the society in an upward spiral and ensure upward mobility for all the groups. And another basic dynamic, as we can see now, we can go back to Mahabharata. There are countless examples in the past, remote past. Nobody asks what the Varna of Lomaharshana is, or Ugrasravas is, or Dharmavyadha is, or Vyasa is. And nobody asked what the caste of Vivekananda or Aurobindo is, or Jaggi Vasudev, for instance, today. People are respected, people with character and knowledge, and when they make good contributions, they will be always valued. So character is something Hindu society has always valued. You will need to understand this respect for person and knowledge distinct from the operational dynamics that are caused by the ups and downs, rise and fall of society in different phases of our long evolution. In the societies, obviously, they are, it's a complex matrix. We have, as I said, the Sampradaya is there, Jati is there, Kula is there, Desha is there, different groups. And this matrix, when it operates, it only always resulted in an upward mobility. When this matrix collapses and each group gets, or each group is seen as an unit, that is when the integration motive gets destroyed and it becomes a disintegration motive. So right now, under the post-colonial rule, the way we see, now region is a problem, language is a problem, culture is a problem. So there is conflict. The people want different state. They can't live with others. A caste can't live with another caste. So all these conflicts are resulted, coming out as a result of rendering these motifs as disintegration motifs. Whereas in a well-designed system, all these motifs are supposed to and have in the past acted as integration motifs. To take a very simple example, Carnatic music. So, it's a Kannada origin. Most of the compositions have been done in Telugu, Tyagaraja and others, and Sanskrit also, and they have been rendered by Tamilians. So integration, harmony, these are not really problems in the society. Society embraces all these things. And that has happened always, all through in the past, as long as we had a healthy Desha perspective. And when this Desha is, not taken cognizance of and is replaced by a geopolitical unit called state, that is when we start seeing all these things becoming disintegration motives. So today people fight for water across regions, people fight for language, for everything. So it's basically our system design that is problematic, which is why we'll need to understand our system design, our institutions. And this is a broad diagram I had in mind, which to my mind reflects best our institutional structure. At the top is the cosmic or the macro, at the bottom is the micro. This is Vyashti, that is Vaishvika. And what operates the cosmic order is the rhythm, the natural order that operates in every being, all aspects of nature is the dharma, which applies for at each individual element. The individual's most micro unit that forms a samishti is family. Then we have different units. So these are three columns basically. On the right is all the institutions of society, the sampradaya, vritti, jati, desha, all these things. In the middle is the hierarchical power structure of the rajya. And in the left is what pervades all these, basically the sampradayas or the lineages, the inherited traditions basically, which are not, genetic inheritance. These are primarily the Guru Shishya inheritance. So what this tells us, obviously this right side, what is there on the right side is non-hierarchical in nature essentially. These are all different units, collectivities. These are adding up in a stratified way. This hierarchy is often conflated because we are tuned unconsciously to look at everything through a nation state perspective, rather than as a traditional rashtra where there is an orthogonality between the institutions of state and society. So here, where does Varna come? Varna comes right in the top. When we talk of the causation of the universe and the nature of the universe, that is why this is actually a Sanatana aspect, because this is not an operating principle at a social level. This is operating principle at a universal level, because it's not just the humans, the trees, flowers, animals, devatas, everything has, everything in the universe is a composition of three gunas. The Vishwa is Trigunatmaka. So anything that is a composition of three gunas will have a Varna, which is why this is put in a cosmic plane, and which is what we also see in the Dharma Shastras. Basically, the sections that deal with Srushti, Karyakarana, how the universe came about. These are the sections where we find a lot of Varna level Mimamsa. Later sections where we see the state and all these things, we will start seeing more specific groups and individual codes and all those things. So this difference we will need to really understand. Putting the Varna into the society is actually, because there is no, in the literature, Varna Vyavastha is not a term we find anywhere. We find Vritti with Kula, we find Dharma with Varna. Vyavastha is not even a term we find with things like Varna. Organized groups or Vyavasthikrita things, that's not the place where we find terms like Varna. So this is something we'll need to clearly understand not just to understand the past, but if we have to design our systems, we will need to have this clarity. So now each collective identity, as I mentioned, they harmonize the micro and macro, the Vyashti and Samishti, to enable fulfillment of individuals, a different layer. So each individual craves different kinds of fulfillment, the aesthetic, the family level, the emotional, the career level, different types. So each collectivity addresses different spheres of human life, and all these put together give a comprehensive fulfillment and overall fulfillment for the individual. The Abhyudaya and Nishresaya are ensured through all the institutions. The different identities are stratified harmoniously. They are not conflicting by nature. The Rajya and the Rashtra, they are orthogonal sets. The Rajya is hierarchical and it represents a power structure. The knowledge traditions, the Rashtra is non-hierarchical. The idea of reconciliation between the micro and macro is a pervasive idea in traditions. So which is what we see in the institution design also. So now we can keep institutions, we can discard institutions for our future. But these are the founding principles on which we have to design our systems for future. And it is because primarily of the strength given by these institutions that we could actually withstand the nature of challenges, the magnitude of challenges we have faced over the last millennium. There is no other civilization which has actually withstood these to this magnitude and is now coming out and becoming a big power yet again within less than a century of independence. Each of these, if we see, these are, each of this is an integration theme in an integral system. If we don't apply the nation state prism, each of these actually becomes an integration theme, as we have seen in the cultural example with Carnatic music. There are countless examples. In contrast to the modern understanding, how do we define an identity? Because today we define identity primarily based on what it constitutes and salience, what differentiates it from the others, which is primarily an outface definition. And every outface definition is going to be conflict prone, believer, non-believer, proletariat and bourgeois. All these things are inherently going to make a vertical split of world as group 1, group 2 and pit them against each other. Whereas all these identities, since they are placed in a bigger matrix, each of them is infaced, each of them is addressing exactly one sphere of life and not defining the full life for an individual. Therefore, there is only principle of inclusion, and it is defining how the it is antarmukha, so to say. It is defining how the practitioner sees things and has to evolve. It's not defining, making any judgment of the non-practitioner. Therefore, obviously, there is no persecution. There is protection of space of each individual and each group. And because each collectivity knows its own place in the big picture, the whole thing is becoming a harmonious scheme. Given this understanding, now it might look very idealistic and all that, but obviously any ideal system when implemented has its challenges based on time and all that. But that's not the point. We'll need to understand the principle to be able to design a good system. Given this, what does it really mean if we have to design our own system in the future? Can we have a flat space? Or can we really understand this institutional structure? Graded collectivity is a reality of all societies. Any denial of this is basically an ostrich-like. And it actually results in more conflict than resolving any conflict. The best way is we understand the nature of collectivities. We render these collectivities as integration motives rather than disintegration motives. And that's the best way we can ensure the individual and the group freedom and fulfillment of individuals. State society orthogonality has to be there. We can't have a nation state. That does not obviously mean the political unity, all these things are not there. That will be there, but state has to take cognizance of the civilizational motives, the nature of the society, while making laws for the society, because state exists for the society. Society does not exist for the state. Does it mean Varna is the basis for assigning any vocations? Varna, as we have seen, it is cosmic. It does not actually play any active role in assignment. There is no direct assignment that happens. Do penalties get applied by Varna? Now here we'll need to understand how the theory of jurisprudence works. Primary principles, again, there it's not about the group or this. It's about ensuring justice and trading it off with equality. Let's say, for instance, a very simple example. A clerk is there, he committed a petty crime. He is jailed for 7 years. His life is devastated. A big politician is there, he committed a crime. He is jailed for 7 years. He comes out and he gets elected again. So basically, the impact that each penalty is making to individuals' lives, in the nature of the individual and his how much he is prone to transformation. So there are principles based on which jurisprudence works. So we can't blindly say that these are done based on the group identity and all that. We'll need to understand the principles, and based on this, so proportionate to the position, proportionate to the transformational ability, proportionate to the misuse of power and all these things, we'll need to design penalties. And what is the role of state in all this? State needs to take cognizance of society, of the institutions of society, of desha, of all these things. State should not make policies based on these. State should ensure that these are all enabled, so that individual fulfillment is not hindered because of state policies. And state is primarily going to be an enabler and an arbiter. So state being aware of the social institution versus state stigmatizing social institution. So this is the difference we'll have to really understand. Today, state actively stigmatizes social institutions while it creates its own social institutions, which is not the intention of the state, but it ends up doing that nevertheless. So which is a blind spot, which happens because there is no proper understanding of these institutions, and they have not been taken cognizance of. There is no desha, there is no jati. None of these terms actually find positive reference in the modern post-colonial statecraft. So once we do that, we will be able to design a fruitful system for us, which will work. Now, a lot of these principles look like they are specific to Bharata, but not essentially. These since more the countries are becoming diverse, more of these principles that involve diverse groups will start getting applied. So this is all that I had. Namaskar. Again, thank you for this opportunity, Prasadji.
That's great, Shankarji. Very detailed, high-level introduction to the topic, and the past and the future. I don't know. There should be some mechanisms to reconcile, between state and institutions and society, so we can move forward. I think we are stuck in a lot of colonial era concepts, and that's what we are trying to live. So the floor is open for questions. Please raise hand in Zoom if you have a question to ask, or you can type in chat always, and I can read it out. So this is the framework you have. Have you presented to any government level policy makers so that we can start with some experiment or implementation of this in a smaller way?
At government level, no. There was a Dharma Dhamma conference in 2017. There I had given a paper, and right now I'm involved with Sangam talks. We created a small group of 4 people where we are trying to theorize this whole thing rather than as a 20-30 page paper. We are trying to build a bigger theoretical framework.
Okay.
It's very nascent, but yeah, that's I think once we have a base core theory to argue, then we will be able to go public and make more presentations.
That's great. Amiji, go ahead.
Thank you, Prasadji. Thank you, Shankarji, for a very knowledgeable presentation. What I want to say is kind of a statement as well as a question. So based on what I listened to you and based on what I heard from you, it's very obvious because India was a prosperous civilization, country, whatever you call it, for thousands of years, and it could never have never have reached such a situation if say 70% of the society was oppressed. Like today, the narrative is that with the lower social caste, like, oh, we were oppressed, and that was the only thing. That is what Hinduism is about: oppression, caste, and differentiation and oppression. And obviously, people in the society today are lower. They're poor, and obviously some of their situation is not really good. But correlated with the Hindu society's structure is in itself not correct. And the question I have is, is it not true that like we've had a prosperous society, and had it been like our society was designed to put down 70% of people, we would have never reached such a stage. Like slave societies do not run long, say the Greeks and Romans, or even the Egyptians, for example, their societies, they reach their peak, they like maybe I don't know how many years, hundreds, 200, 300, 500,000 years, but eventually a slave society disintegrates. In India it did not happen. Your thoughts on that, please? Thank you.
Exactly. Obviously slavery was never institutionalized, but apart from that, if we look at the Chaturvarna, obviously there was a healthy proportion of all the 4 Varnas. It was not as if Shudras were the majority. There was always an attempt to ensure these were all in healthy proportions. So there is never a case where there is a non-prospering majority that would never result in a prosperous society overall. That I 100% agree, and which is precisely the point. Today, if you have majority of backward groups, we are basically pushing society downwards. So the policy design, the system design is fundamentally wrong. It should aim at upward mobility and upward spiraling of society, where more groups become, they take higher vocations. I agree with you.
Ricky ji, please go ahead. Can you please unmute your? Okay.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Ricky Rosati. I'm in Vermont in the United States, and I have been studying Ayurveda for about 4 years, and I just am so grateful of all of the knowledge and the thousands of years of intelligence that is being shared from that life science. And unfortunately, at our library, they have allowed several public speakers to say things that are very misinformative to the public. And and recently, there is a person who is claiming to be a doctor that said that he thinks that Buddhi Siddhartha Gautama from the Sakya kingdom was illiterate, and that his teachings were not written down for several hundred years after his death. And I personally, I think, I don't know exactly, but I think that that is wrong. I really doubt that to be true at all. And I was wondering if you think that like denouncing his credibility is appropriate or not.
So I'm sorry, I was not able to follow the question. Do you mind rephrasing or repeating for me?
Yeah. Well, I have two questions. The first one is about how there is a person in Vermont who is publicly saying at our library, and there's a video of him saying it as well that's going to be put on our community television station, that he thinks that Buddhi Siddhartha Gautama from the Sakya kingdom was illiterate, that he couldn't read and write, and that his teachings were not written down for hundreds of years, and that I don't believe that is true, but I don't know for sure. And do you think that he should be corrected?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that can be true.
You think he's wrong?
Okay, Pratima, please
Namaste.
go ahead. Pratima, please go ahead.
Namaste, my name is Pratima. I am an assistant professor in a law university. My question is, and my concern also, these days I find the young people getting into pratilom marriages. Now, how do you view pratilom marriages and this increasing trend? Is it an influence of the woke culture? Please comment on it.
It's a natural outcome. If we set the society in a downward spiral, pratiloma will happen. If the society is incentivized to be in an upward spiral, there is a natural craving to do more anuloma. So it's basically not, I mean, woke is very recent, right? I mean, this whole problem started much earlier. Pratiloma had, and in fact, in a prospering society, both anuloma, pratiloma happened, which is why in the text we see both kinds of combinations, we see all kinds of groups. And pratiloma has resulted in these groups. Those are also powerful groups. Primarily problem is not that. In a general prospering society, there is a good equilibrium between these kinds of trends, and the typical dominant trend will be of the anuloma. Pratiloma, the main problem is not about caste bigotry, right? It's not about identity politics or anything. The main problem is the general, the overall level going downwards. The culture level or the economic level going downwards is the main problem with pratiloma. If we have to put it that way, in terms of culture level, if things are going down, that is pratiloma. So it's naturally something that needs to be discouraged, not at an individual level though. That's going to be counterproductive. If we discourage pratiloma at an individual level, we will need to educate our individuals in our own households to aspire for a higher culture level and seek partner that way. So this will probably, that way we can create a more positive incentive system towards anulomas. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's good. Anandji, please go ahead.
Namaskar, I am Anand Guriye. You talked about prosperity of the society versus prosperity of the Varna. Here, I like to point out that the prosperity of the Varna, the serial level, was first the Vaishya, then the Shudra, then the Kshatriya, and then the Brahmin. So, if they were socially lower class, they were economically upper class. That has always been the case. As early as even 50 years ago, you will see a number of people from the Shudra Varna are amongst the richest. So as far as the society was concerned, the Kshatriya and the Brahmins were prohibited from holding or hoarding money. But no such restrictions were there for the Vaishya as well as the Shudra. So economically, they were better off.
Is true, but I mean, there are always across the spectrum. You will have people, right? I mean, in Mahabharata, you had people like Drona who were very rich Brahmins. You had also very poor Brahmins. In all groups, generally, everything will be there. I mean, in a big society, we can't oversimplify, but yes, the general recommendation has been that way because people who can wield power have more leverage to misuse it. So therefore, there is a tendency to, or there is a deliberate intent in the text to discourage collusion between powerful groups, let us say money and power, a collusion is problematic. So there is an attempt to ensure these are specialized so that, the corruption doesn't happen much. But yes, I mean, whether the Brahminid is discouraged, yes, the knowledge function. But then if you see, let us say, even if you see the modern theories like Maslow pyramid, right? The higher you go in terms of internal evolution, there is a corresponding tendency to dissociate with material power usually. So a better understanding of human cognition will help us design better systems where these naturally happen rather than coming as a normative of rules for people to do this or not to do this. That will be more organic.
There is one question in chat. I'm just going to read out.
Yeah. I think two questions.
So
One
can you please
is-
explain the difference between integration and disintegration motives and how they lead to growth and downfall of society?
Primarily, every group offers certain level of cohesion. Let us say the jati is there, or the desha is there, or the linguistic unit is there. Every kind of unit, or the sampradaya is there, or even our educational institution is there. Each of them gives a certain level of cohesion where we can interact with people, we can enrich ourselves and fulfill ourselves as a collective organism. This is an integration motive. Now, if there are two groups fighting each other, this group identity becomes a disintegration motive because it is resulting in a conflict. In our institutional structure, Hindu institutional structure, each of the unit collectivity acted as an integration motive, which is why you see the Carnatic example, right? Across regions, across languages, people could come together, they worked harmoniously with each other, although they belong to different political units. Today, people from different political units don't work harmoniously. They are in a current, always never-ending conflict. They fight on language, they fight on culture, they fight on, the funding, they fight on region, they fight on landscape, everything. So the system design is actually resulting in a disintegration motive for all these social groups today, because the post-colonial state is designed that way. Whereas the traditional state, the Rajya Rashtra, have been designed in a way that each of these groups act as integration motives. I don't know if that's answering your question. If there is a further follow-up question.
Good. That's good. So Shankarji, I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you so much for coming, joining us, presenting your framework of past and the future social order, what it should be and what it was. Thank you everybody for joining. This was a very different topic rather than having information presented. It was more of a framework type of presentation. Fantastic work, Shankarji, and thank you all for joining. We'll see you again next time.